to Spook Asylum. You found a place where the lights never stay on, and the doors only open one way. I am the Pale Narrator. Tonight, 3 haunted homes where the living weren't the only tenants. These accounts are presented as told. Believe them or don't. But if you feel a breath on your neck while you listen, don't turn around. Some houses creak because they're old. Some because something inside is trying not to be heard. Story number 1. The room that rearranges itself. They say every house has its own rhythm. A creak here, a sigh there. But what if the rhythm changes when you're asleep? A young couple, Lisa and Mark, had just moved into their first real home. An old 2-story in a quiet cul-de-sac. It wasn't perfect. A little damp, a little crooked, but it was theirs. On their first night as they unpacked boxes, Lisa stopped and frowned. "Did you put that chair facing the hallway?" Mark shook his head. The dining chair, the one she'd placed by the table, was now angled perfectly towards the dark corridor. They laughed it off. Old floors, right? Everything shifts, eventually. Morning came, and the rug in the living room was crooked. The curtain ties were undone. A stack of boxes had been pushed flush against the opposite wall. They thought maybe they'd just remembered wrong. But the next morning, the couch had moved a full foot to the left. Mark even checked for earthquakes. Nothing. No neighbours had keys. Just them. And a cat that still refused to enter that room. They joked that the house wanted better feng shui. But by the end of the week, the laughter stopped. While repainting, Lisa noticed rows of tiny nail holes beneath the fresh plaster, as if someone had once hung dozens of pictures there, then tried to cover the evidence. She measured the spacing. It matched the current wall, but not the layout they'd chosen. In fact, it outlined the previous arrangement of furniture down to where the sofa once stood. That night, she asked the neighbour, Mrs. Coleman, if anyone had lived there before them. Oh yes, Mrs. Lawton, sweet woman, couldn't stand when things were out of place. Said her husband always moved the furniture to freshen up the house. After he died, she nailed everything down so he couldn't. Lisa smiled politely, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mark wanted proof, so one evening they sprinkled a thin layer of flour on the living room floor, a perfect dusting between each piece piece of furniture. They marked the legs of every chair and table with pencil lines. At 3:11 a.m., the baby monitor crackled to life, though they didn't have a baby. Lisa woke first, heart pounding. Through the static came a low, steady hum, an old woman's lullaby, soft and wavering. She shook Mark awake. They listened. The hum stopped. The monitor went dead. They crept downstairs together. Lights flickered on. Every piece of furniture was back in place. Not how they'd left it, but arranged exactly as the nail holes had shown. Their pencil marks were now inches off. The rug was turned completely around, and in the flower, 2 bare footprints, small and deep, leading from the center of the room to the old credenza, and then stopping. No return prints, no smudges, just gone. Maybe she's finally happy now, said Lisa. But Mark didn't answer, because somewhere behind them, the dining chair creaked. Not every haunting slams doors. Some just tidy up after themselves. And some, even after death, still can't stand a mess. Story number 2. The Tenant in the Attic. Some homes whisper through the walls, others listen, and sometimes what they hear makes them hungry. When Ryan, a quiet graphic designer, rented the top floor of a Victorian terrace, he thought he'd found peace. High ceilings, old timber floors, a perfect workspace. But on his very first night, something above him began to move. At 2 a.m., steady pacing, heel to toe, right above him. The attic hatch was sealed with layers of paint. He stared up at it for a long time before finally whispering, "Old house, just relax." He didn't sleep after that. The next night, it started again. This time, different footsteps, lighter, uneven, like someone pacing in a circle. He just turned the TV up, and it stopped. Then came the sound of something small, a marble maybe, rolling slowly across the ceiling. Ryan laughed nervously and told himself it was mice, but he couldn't explain why every sound stopped the moment he entered the hallway below the hatch. A week later, small objects began disappearing. His keys, a cufflink, a single shoe. Each would reappear the next morning, somewhere they didn't belong. once turned up on his pillow, freezing cold. The landlord shrugged. Old houses settle, drafts push things around. But drafts don't move keys from a hook to a bed. That night, Ryan set his phone to record audio. He placed it on the coffee table, hit record, and went to bed. The next morning, he listened back. At 2:43 a.m., through the hiss came a voice, counting 7, 8, 9. He paused it, played it again. The voice wasn't his. And after 9, something knocked on the microphone. He stopped listening after that. By the end of the week, he couldn't take it. He brought up a stepladder and a hammer. Paint cracked as he pried at the hatch. A wave of hot, stale air breathed down over him, and there, tied to the hatch bolt, was a string. He followed it up with his flashlight. It disappeared into the dark. He climbed one rung higher and lifted the hatch. Inside was a single pallet bed, a few empty tins, and a pile of Polaroids stacked neatly in the dust. He brushed one off. It was a photo of his bedroom, taken from above. The next was the same, and the next. Weeks worth of shots, each dated by hand in ink. The final photo was from that night. He was asleep in bed, but the photo was taken from right above him. He dropped it, the ladder shook. Something shifted in the dark above him. Sometimes it isn't the dead who do the haunting. Sometimes the living learn how. Story number 3. The Caretaker's Log. Some buildings die quietly. Others take their time, and if you listen long enough, you can still hear the heart monitor. Thomas Gray, 62, was the night caretaker for St. Augustine's care home, a place closed 6 months earlier after the last patient passed. Every night he signed in, checked the boiler, and walked the empty halls until sunrise. He'd worked there for 20 years, and even now, he said it just felt wrong to leave the old residents alone in the dark. So he kept a logbook, writing every sound, every draft, every little creak in the building. It was his way of proving to himself that the place was truly empty. One night, around 2:30 a.m., Thomas heard something from the east wing, the dementia ward. He would later describe it as soft crying. He checked every room. Nothing. Just peeling wallpaper and rusting bed frames. When he returned to his desk, the logbook was open to a fresh page, and someone had written a new entry in his own handwriting. 2:30 a.m. Checked East Wing, resident awake, calmed them, all quiet. He stared at it for a long time. He hadn't written that, but the pen was still warm to the touch. A week later, the nurse call lights began to blink, one after another, down the empty corridor. He silenced each in turn, but as soon as he reset the panel, another would start, always in room 12. He stopped logging it, didn't want to give it attention, but one night, the alarm didn't stop. It stayed on, constant, until he unplugged the entire system. And then he heard it through the unplugged speaker. "Nurse, I can't feel my hands." Thomas sat perfectly still, because he recognized that voice. It belonged to a woman he'd helped bury in March. He started bringing a small tape recorder, telling himself he'd capture the noises, prove it was pipes or wind. What he captured instead was his own footsteps, 2 sets of them overlapping. He played it again and again. The second rhythm was half a beat behind his, always following. By now, he'd stopped turning the lights on during his rounds, said the dark made it easier to hear. And sometimes, in the dark, he'd hear them breathing in the rooms. 12 slow, shallow breaths, perfectly in sync. He even started talking to them, and when he said goodnight, something whispered back, "Good night, Tom." The next morning, the day caretaker found the logbook open. There was one final entry written neatly inside. 4:02 a.m. All residents accounted for. Routine completed. End of shift. But Thomas never clocked out. His keys were on a desk. His flashlight lay by the door. The only other thing found that night was a fresh staff ID badge lying on the pillow in room 12. Issued to Thomas Gray. Status: resident. They say old buildings echo, but sometimes it isn't an echo at all. It's a roll call, and when your name's called, you don't clock out. Some halls never stop their rounds. Every night, the lights flicker once, the logbook turns a page, and the air smells faintly of disinfectant and rain. If you ever find yourself yourself walking through an abandoned ward and hear someone softly crying for help, don't answer. Because here in Spook Asylum, not every voice that calls your name still remembers how to stop. New nightmares are waiting. Subscribe if you dare.